Welcome to the Everton Byline. This is episode 16. Paddy, who's your favourite Everton player to win number 16? Can you think of any off the top of your head?
That was a curveball right at the start.
Just making sure you're on your toes at the start of the podcast, because I know you doze through my intros sometimes.
I can't remember what happened yesterday. Never mind who's number 16 for Everton.
One comes to mind for me straight away.
Decore's been 16 at certain points, hasn't he?
He's been 16, but he wasn't. I was thinking of Thomas Gravesen.
I mean, Gravesen's an excellent shout. And I think we'll remember Thomas Gravesen as a very, very good footballer in general. Not just with Everton, but at Real Madrid, with the Danish national team. Decore, an important figure in Everton's modern history, very important. So there's another shout out. And then
I'm not sure I can think of any other.
Be struggling. we've got two, so that'll do a job.
Jags were number 16 for a bit. I'll check this out before the end of the show. But I think when he first arrived, he might have wore 16. But I'll have to check.
I loved Phil Jagielka. Phil Jagielka. That was like my era growing up, watching Everton. Moyes at Everton with Jagielka and either Lescott or Distan as his partner. But Jagielka, that kind of figure of permanence, and I always thought he was really underrated by people outside of the club and outside of Merseyside. He was rapid as well, and nobody really seemed to realise it. But it was only when he played against. Remember that triple header they had against Liverpool between, I think it was January to February. They had 3 games, including cup replays. Torres was at his absolute pomp then for Liverpool, and probably the quickest striker in the league at that point. But Jagielka was the only one, as far as I can remember, who'd match him kind of stride for stride. He was such a good player.
I will rattle off Everton's number 16 history. I mean, you can tell it's the international break on you that we started here. But Decore obviously is the current incumbent. And before that, we had McCarthy, Thomas Hitzelsperger, Jermaine Beckford, Phil Jagielka in his first year. There you go. Julian Lescott, Lee Carsley, Thomas Gravesen, Danny Cadamatri, Michael Branch, Vinny Samways, David Burrows, Preki, and Jim Arnold. What a squad number history that is.
Well, Lee Carsley, I think we can call him former England interim head coach now, can we? On that list, really like Lee Carsley. Obviously, the two baldies in midfield, and they
both won it.
The old. Maybe they alternated just to confuse opponents. I don't know.
Yeah, that would confuse matters even more. But then Carsley went to 26, didn't he?
Yeah.
For a bit, yeah. I mean, we have gone massively off track here. Welcome to the Everton Byline here on the Blue Room during the international break. I am Matt Jones, your host here at the Blue Room and editor at the Liverpool Echo. And Paddy is, of course, from The Athletic. As a reminder, this podcast is sponsored by the Bridewell pub in town. It is lovely. It is great to shelter from this horrible wind and rain at this time of year, so do get in. I'm a bevy if you're about this week or at the weekend. Paddy, how are you? You were in Vienna this weekend. Have you enjoyed the international break?
Oh, I absolutely loved the international break. I suppose we all get to this point in the season where Everton's saturation point, where we need a break from it. And you delight in doing absolutely everything that you can't do when Everton are playing over a weekend. I think like the thing that people maybe don't see as much with our jobs is that, you got the match coverage and obviously we're visibly at these games. But if it's in Southampton or Ipswich or whatever, you probably spend either the evening of the game or most of the next day trying to get back. So it becomes kind of all-consuming. It takes up a lot of the weekend, and if results are bad, that it's not very helpful. So I mean, obviously joking a little bit about kind of wanting to avoid Everton, but it is genuinely nice to have a bit of downtime from it and to do something completely different. So I don't know, as much as I can do in this job, I've probably had an Everton detox for a while, and I think we all need that every now and then.
Well, I worked all weekend, so less so for me. But
not one for you then.
No, less so for me. But it was nice enough to have a game sort of the weekend pivoted around. But certainly from the lads. But we'll start off there actually, because we are going to be talking about a few other points today. We've got a lot of questions in. But before we start, just got to give a shout out to the girls on Sunday. Really, Paddy, obviously, a lot of plugging and pushing from the club about the last ever women's derby at Goodison on Sunday. They've not been in great form, I think it's fair to say. They've had a pretty torrid start to the campaign. But it's sort of like the antithesis of the fellas, isn't it? Like, no matter how rubbish or how much they're struggling, the girls, they just always seem to have one over on Liverpool. And on Sunday, let's be honest, everything that could have gone for them did go for them, with the penalty and the saves and the last-ditch defending, but they got over the line, and it was great to see so many people there at Goodison. And just, I think the first win of the season was never going to be pretty free-flowing football, was it? It was always going to look a bit like that. And thankfully, they managed to get over the line. And seeing them bottom of the table before that game was not good. And hopefully, they can just start to pull away from that now.
Yeah, I mean, a fantastic result. And as you say, you almost flip the derby dominance on its head from the male side. Everton women unbeaten in the last 6 against Liverpool, and they've lost a home derby against Liverpool since 2017. And I do wonder to what extent some of this is like a mental thing now. I mean, right now, look at the table, Liverpool are a better team than Everton. But they've been relegated much more recently. Over the last few years, they have been underdogs traditionally in these games. A little bit how Everton on the men's side have gone into these matches, particularly at Anfield, with most people outside of the kind of the Everton Merseyside bubble expecting a home victory. And I think that helps. I think that makes it harder. That kind of mental stigma that you've got, I think that makes it harder for the opposition. And a brilliant result. I mean, they absolutely needed it. And I've felt very sorry for them at times this season, because they've had injuries, they've had a really low budget, like on the men's side. Just about everything that could go wrong has gone wrong in these games. And a real chronic lack of goals up front as well. I mean, you look at the tally for this season, they've only scored 3, including the penalty on Sunday. One of the others is an own goal from a looped, deflected cross. It was only the penultimate round of fixtures that they scored their first goal that wasn't an own goal themselves. So they've really, really struggled in the final third. And some of the performances have been quite good. They've been in most of their games. And particularly, I saw them play away at Leicester, and they absolutely battered Leicester and somehow managed to lose that game 1-0. So nice to see luck go the other way. And I think despite the poor start of the season, I know Brian Sorensen, the head coach, is held in high regard at the club. He's seen as a kind of very, very, very good developer of talent, a good spotter of talent as well. Because obviously having much smaller recruitment teams on the women's side, and you often lean pretty heavily on a manager and a manager's contacts in the game when it comes to signing players. He's very highly thought of, and I think a lot of the discussion around where they've been so far this season has focused on the injury plight and the lack of investment and stuff like that. These are all seen as, some of this will ring bells when you go across to the men's side, but I think that they are seen as factors that have obviously worked against him and them. And a brilliant result. I mean, really smartly taken penalty. It obviously should have been a free kick, not a penalty, because the foul was outside the box. Great penalty from somebody in Catches Noise who works so hard up front. But maybe Marcus Bent style does a lot of running in the channels and isn't always there for the final ball, the final pass, the final shot. She had her moment in front of the park end, and some pretty heroic stuff in terms of last-ditch blocks and saves, and Courtney Brosnan in goal, fantastic double save in the second half to preserve the lead. So huge shout out to them. Brian Sorensen, I think he summed it up afterwards in his post-match comments, and he said, we love this game and we wish it had been our first or second of the season, because in effect,
yeah,
if you carry that thought on, because we always beat Liverpool and we'd have had our first win of the season very early doors. So
yeah, can we play you every week? Sort of vibes. I saw Sarah set them up nicely as well for a Merseyside is blue in the their post-match interview. Well done there, Sarah. That was great work. But yeah, the one thing I'd say about him is he's very loud. Like I was watching that game yesterday, and you could hear him like properly barking instructions out on the sidelines. But if anyone wants more coverage on that, by the way, Peter Mack was there yesterday, setting up the display beforehand and helping with all that, and in the ground, obviously, short podcast he's done out on the Blue Room feed if you want to check that out. We'll move on, Paddy. Which one more topic I wanted to touch upon before we go into people's questions from X and Blue Sky now, as we're over there. A piece you wrote last week about Jake O'Brien, and he's become the forgotten man at Everton to the point where when I saw that pop on my feed, I thought, oh my God, I forgot he was even here. Because there has been so much talk about Branthwaite and Keane and Tarkowski and sort of like, why isn't Branthwaite playing? Why is, should Keane be playing? Should Tarkowski be playing? Yeah. And, he's not really been mentioned at all, probably since the opening weeks of the season as a genuine contender for a starting spot. But I think it's interesting, sort of, it was an interesting piece, sort of the way in which you looked at it. Obviously, noting there's been a bit of transfer interest in him in January in regards to his a potential loan. But it's one that just looks and feels a bit weird, doesn't it? I think I'd sort of characterise it as like if he'd signed for someone like Brighton or maybe someone like Brentford and he hadn't played a game yet, you'd look at those clubs and say, there's obviously a plan there for him to develop behind the scenes, to come in maybe when they sell a bigger name next season. And it's all thought out and forward planning. So on the one hand, I sort of fall down on the should I give Everton credit for that if that is the case, as you sort of allude to in your report? But on the other hand, I sort of look at us and go, we're spending around £15 million on this lad in the end. He is the fourth choice centre half, but potentially more. He is the fourth choice centre half. That is without doubt now. Should we have done that when we are effectively still, under this regime, we are kind of living hand to mouth financially, as we've spoken about a lot on this podcast. It is all about getting into that new ground. It is short-term thinking for the time being. So I don't know whether to say this is, because on the one hand, I look at this deal, I think this is the sort of thing well-run football clubs, I'd say, are doing. But knowing Everton haven't been that, I'm not sure they've done that necessarily with that in mind, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, the premise for the piece very much came about from some of those discussions, and seen a lot, particularly over the last month or so, of people asking why Everton spent, I think it's 16.4 million eventually, if all bonuses are met, on somebody who has in essence become a fourth choice centre back. And on the balance of it, when there are weaknesses elsewhere, quite obvious weaknesses elsewhere in the squad, that does look odd. So it definitely pause for thought and kind of a driver for the piece. I do think there was a plan with him, and I think the plan actually was for him to be number 3, the kind of the Ben Godfrey figure in the squad, behind obviously the established pair of Jared Branthwaite and James Tarkowski. Now, the problem with plans is that they only work if everyone's on the same page. So if you've got somebody with one idea and somebody else with a different idea, then very quickly you get to a different place, don't you? And I think that the spanner in the works here has been Branthwaite's injury, which has created a situation where somebody else has needed to play, but also Dyche's faith in Michael Keane. And we know. I mean, he's got unwavering faith. Like, if you go back over his entirety of his time at Everton, Dyche, he's given Michael Keane ample opportunities, and probably will continue to do so, some capacity while he remains here, because they've built up that mutual trust from their time together at Turf Moor, and that's obviously meant that Michael Keane's gone up in the pecking order at a time when O'Brien was looking to establish himself. And I do feel pretty sorry for him, because last season was a really positive story it's really positive part of Jake O'Brien's career so far. He left Palace in search of regular football, played in Belgium for a much smaller team, and then got a big move to Lyon. Did so well with Lyon that wasn't only Everton. I mean, Atalanta were following him. Nottingham Forest came in. I believe he rejected that over the summer. Loads of teams were watching him, Ajax and various others in England. We're all in and around the situation over the summer. And he could, at various points, have had his pick. And I think he's looked at the situation at Everton and gone, Godfrey's on his way out. They've really wanted me for a long time, because obviously there was interest last season as well. And also, we don't know what's going on with Branthwaite. And obviously, those things have been in Everton's mind as well. I mean, the point at which he signed, Man United was still at the table for Branthwaite. Didn't know which way that was going to go. Godfrey had left. Godfrey had said that he wasn't going to sign a new deal and wanted to move. And he was sold predominantly for PSR purposes, I believe. So I think the deal cropped up and they tried for things elsewhere. They tried for Nonto, as we know, from Leeds, a top target in the wing positions. But I think they just got to the point where they were so far down the list of targets on the wing that it almost became, well, do we actually want to commit this much money to somebody who's some way down our list on the wing when there's this guy who we really like? They do really like him. We really like him and we can get him now. It just looks odd in light of recent events, and I kind of understand why fans are asking the question, because I don't think Everton can really afford to have a £17 million fourth choice centre back.
Yeah, and I think to give them the benefit of the doubt and look at this from a positive point of view, I suppose if we're going to transition from being a club that's ran terribly and does bad deals and into one that's going to be ran well and forward plans, then we're going to get the odd transfer like this, which we look at in the cold light of day, like when we're living in this moment right now, and go, what's this all about? And it won't become clear to us what the plan is further down the line. And I suppose this is the sort of thing that's going to happen when, potentially you are going through a change of ownership, or when you are thinking about next season when you might have a different manager and a different style of play. And I suppose, and the thing I've always advocated for is for the director of football to have a bit more influence on these sort of things and to set the strategy. And, whether you think Kevin Farwell's, the right fella or not, or is he going to be here next season is another matter entirely. But I think if the director of football sets the strategy out, then maybe you get more of these sorts of deals. And especially when you've got a manager coming to the end of a contract who is very much about the here and now and is about survival and being cautious. So I think
most of these deals are, Matt. I mean, I look at the O'Brien one, go back to last season, and people like Dan Juma. Lots of these names that we're seeing are people that were on the recruitment team's radar. I mean, obviously, Kevin Thelwell oversees that. He's not head of recruitment. He oversees a whole number of departments, but recruitment is one of them. So that falls under his guys. Jake O'Brien, to me, kind of young, resale value. That seems like a very natural fit for what Thelwell wants Everton to be moving forward. Amadou Onana, Iliman Ndiaye, investing in young talent, Chimiti, players like that, investing in young talent to kind of either get into the first team and develop, or sell on in future for decent profit. I think where we struggle a little bit is that you've probably got a manager who's not particularly comfortable always. And maybe that's doing him a bit of a disservice sometimes. He has played Branthwaite, he has played Ndiaye, he has brought others into the fold. But I think he's a little bit less willing to do that than maybe is required when you have somebody like Jake O'Brien. And I think the problem there is that you get kind of nearly 6 months into his time at Everton. He's played 26 Premier League minutes, Jake O'Brien. 26 minutes. They're out of the Carabao Cup, which was a great opportunity for him to start to develop and adapt in this setup. But there's probably, you're going to have to wait until January for another cup appearance. And if there's anything like the Carabao, he might not get many FA Cup
and then you draw like Liverpool away, as we always do in that cup, and you're out. But like, I do feel a bit sorry for him, like you said. But like all of this now, like what we're talking about is like not being able to plan for the future, not being able to give young players a chance. Thinking very short termism. This is like this is more collateral damage, isn't it, of not being down the bottom of the table, because you can't essentially say, well, we'll give this lad a go and he might make a mistake at home to Brentford at the weekend and it won't really matter that much because we've got enough breathing room. Like there's that constant undercurrent of we're desperate, we're desperate to get, but it might go if we get some good results and we move clear of the bottom three. But at the moment, it's still there lingering, isn't it? And ultimately, this manager and the way in which he goes about things, whether you like him or not, he is someone for the here and now, and it feels like that's it. So he's not gonna really want to invest in, developing players necessarily like O'Brien or maybe someone like Patterson or other youngsters, because ultimately there's not going to be no benefit to him next year if he's not here.
Yeah, well, I think that is also Dyche, and while I agree with a lot of what you've said there, I also think that if Everton were in 8th at the moment, it still wouldn't be Jake O'Brien in over Tarkowski and Branthwaite at the weekend. I kind of get that. That's just Dyche, foibles and all. I mean, there will come a time when the Freaking group, and it may already be now, in fairness, there'll become a time when they're assessing all these things, when they're looking at his suitability for the role of manager, both now and moving forward. So what's our strategy and does he adhere to it? And obviously you've had some examples where Dyche has obviously bought in kind of promotion of Jared Branthwaite last season and putting in Dyche straight into the team more or less this time around. I think the relationship with Amadou Onana was slightly uncomfortable in terms of selection and trust. Not worked out so far here. And then I don't think Danjuma was necessarily a player to develop and then sell on, because he was obviously a lone player. But he didn't play more or less at all. And I think we've seen since that Danjuma is a good player who just wasn't really getting enough minutes. Some of that will be Danjuma's fault for effort and application and all the other stuff. But it's not an easy marriage, is it? I think that kind of resale value and long-term thinking with Sean Dyche. And look, maybe the Freaking group don't want to go down that avenue. I don't know yet. I don't think anybody does. We need to hear more about their vision. But the point I'm making is one of the things they will inevitably look at is, does he do what we want? And does he develop players for resale? All those kinds of things. He'll be able to point to some positive examples, but there'll also be a Jake O'Brien or two on the other side of the fence. Might give people pause for thought.
Definitely, really interesting stuff. That I would encourage people to go and check it out for sure. We've had a lot of questions in, Paddy, so we're going to rattle through these. Okay, I'm going to be like a debate moderator on time here, so no Rob Vera monologues allowed answering these, because we want to try and get through as many as possible. I really appreciate everybody for getting in touch and asking us these, by the way. Like I said, we are on Blue Sky as well as X at the moment. In honor of the new platform, Paddy, we'll do the Blue Sky ones first.
Yeah. Okay.
So we've got this one from Peter Toshgad. Sorry if I've pronounced that terribly, mate. He just said, Broja, sign of an injury expected back mid-October. Finally back in training now. What do you expect from him? Personally, not impressed with his stats. 8 goals in 5 seasons so far, 63 games. 6 of them for Southampton. 15, 20 games for potentially 4 goals. I'm assuming that's for us. That's optimistic. So obviously he's back in training now. So what are we on, the 19th of November now? So I think Dyche was quite cautious, wasn't he, before the break about his prospects of being involved straight away, but he is back on the grass. And it doesn't look like he's far off, does it? I don't know. I think we've spoken about this very briefly before on this podcast, but it felt like one where an opportunity just came up for Everton late in the window and they've jumped on it.
Yeah, for a player they've always liked and they've always really, really rated. And again, that goes back far beyond Dyche's time to Lampard and multiple attempts, in fairness, to sign Broja, both in that window and in future windows as well. I guess we'll see relatively soon, if all goes to plan. Whether that faith in Broja was well placed, at least there's minimal cost attached to this because Everton don't start paying his wages until he's back on the pitch, kicking a ball for them in competitive action. And I do think that'll probably take a bit of time. I mean, I was quite flippant on Blue Sky, where I went through a checklist of what a player needs to do before they're back out there after an injury, and it was kind of back on the grass with a tick. And then I think that the next stage, obviously, is games program, as Dyche calls it, which inevitably will involve under 21 minutes. I mean, he was asked, Dyche, before the break, whether there was the potential for a bounce game or two to get the players up to speed. He felt at that stage that it was too soon, and I've not heard anything to the contrary since. So once we get through probably a game or two, I'd suggest probably 2 games in the under 21 setup. Then you've also then got the final step, which I think Peter Mack referred to as nuts and bolts. I referred to it as true fitness, which is another one. Which
sounds
is another one.
Like a gym, like a gym chain that's opened.
It's like a Dyche style boot camp. He uses true fitness quite a lot. So they're the steps, and we've only ticked one of those off at the moment. So I think it'll be a little bit of time, and Everton obviously won't pay until he's fit. So in essence, what we're likely to get is the final half of the season. I would suggest for him, provided he stays fit to show what he can do, and hopefully persuade Everton to activate that purchase option with Calvert-Lewin's future.
Yeah.
He definitely up for grabs.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. Got this one in from Swelter the Chef, who said, "Why do you think Everton are finding it so hard to find a decent long-term replacement at right back?" I mean, it has been an ordeal, hasn't it? I think it's probably a combination, Paddy, of like, I think you've got to give credit to Coleman as well. Like late in his career, I think he's remodeled his game quite well. I mean, listen, he's not the force he was by any means, but I remember, in his early mid-20s, saying that, talking about how he was pretty terrible defensively. I mean, the defending is probably the best part of his game, or certainly was, and has been in the past couple of years. So I think he's managed to evolve his game, and has maybe battled off a few challenges, but the challenges haven't really been able to sustain any kind of form or fitness, really to mount a real challenge to him. I suppose that Patterson was the great hope. It's not worked out for him. I think poor recruitment ultimately. I'd put it down to, as much as Seamus has done pretty well in recent years.
Yeah, I mean, and this is no comment actually at the moment on Nathan Patterson's ability. But I think that signing has created this situation right now, in the sense that actually, if you look at most Premier League squads, they don't carry more than 2 regular right backs. Certainly, if you're outside of Europe and you're trying to operate within the PSR parameters, that's going to be a real struggle. So you've got Seamus Coleman there as kind of your club stalwart, the guy you have around, but he's going to play a reduced role. But you've also had an injured Nathan Patterson for a lot of the last 12 to 18 months. So I think there's been a reluctance to add another one on in that position when you've got Young. You've got, I actually think Young, by the way, even though he's versatile, I think he was initially signed as cover for Mikolenko on the left, but somebody who could play in both positions. You've got Dixon, you've obviously got James Garner. So options quite stuck there, and by now you would have hoped to have seen something decisive either way on Nathan Patterson with regards to his future. Some fans may have made their mind up on him, but what I do know is that this was considered to be a really big season for him at Everton, and the hope was that he'd push on and be the number 1 right back this year. He's still not fit. He's still, well, he is fit, but he's not match fit. He's not playing games, and it's taken him a long time to get there. So I think that's been the problem. And I go back to what they needed at the time Coleman, we were first talking about a successor to Coleman and the time Patterson was signed. They went for Benitez, chose to go for a young, up-and-coming right back to eventually try and dislodge Coleman. And what they probably needed in reality, they either needed somebody who was super gifted that would come in and do that more or less straight away, like a Livramento type, or just like a proper right back who come in and be the takeover immediately from Coleman. And obviously the two options there that the recruitment team had looked at were Livramento, who I mentioned as a young up and coming type, and then at the other end of the spectrum, Denzel Dumfries, who I think Marcel Brands in particular was very fond of. In hindsight, those two options look like missed opportunities, don't they? Let's see what Nathan Patterson does from now on. He's not been lucky with injuries, but I think he needs to push on now, doesn't he?
Yeah, I remember Livramento playing against us in that first game of the season when the first game back after COVID and it was full ground and he played for Southampton. Yeah, and he was class and it was like, he looks like a really good player who we missed out on there. I think he got a bad injury, didn't he, a few weeks later, but obviously came back and has made his England debut, didn't he, at the weekend? Looks a really good player from that point of view. We've had two questions on a similar theme, one from Chris on Blue Sky and one from Carl on Twitter. I'm asking about Dyche. I'll read Chris's out. It's a bit quicker. If the takeover is completed in the next few weeks as anticipated, do we think the freaking group gets rid of Dyche immediately? I would say I'd be surprised, Paddy, unless things go very, very badly over the next few weeks. And it would feel like an immediate win for them if they were to do it because things have got so toxic. Let's hope it doesn't get to that. But I'd be surprised if they would, don't know loads about them, don't know what they're thinking, don't know what talks they're having, or if they're paying loads of attention to what's going on at the moment. But to come in and sack a manager straight away, I think would be a bit of a surprise.
Yeah, and they'll have a lot of other things to do when you look at stuff we've spoken about previously, to do with having a new CEO, chair, board, potentially resolving Kevin Thirlwell's future as director of football, potentially a January transfer window. Wherever Everton are in the table, let's hope it's not in the relegation zone at that point. There might be some business to be done, or there might be suggestion that Everton should do business from some quarters. So there's going to be a lot going on anyway. And Dyche is contracted until the end of the season. So the truth is we don't know right now. We haven't had noises either way with regards to Dyche. So this is purely guesswork on my behalf. But I agree with you. I think it would be a surprise if they chose to bite the bullet straight away, unless there was real sign that things were escalating with regards to results and or significant fan discontent as well. And obviously I know there has been fan discontent. There are people that aren't happy with the manager. But I think it would maybe have to get even worse and maybe significantly worse for them to do that straight away. That's just my opinion rather than anything I've heard.
No, I totally get that. Couple more, and then we'll finish off with a quick fire one from Maggie. This is from Jack. He said, does speculation around Dan Purdy's future have any immediate impact on plans for January and signal any sort of change to structure by the Friedkins? I think this has come from a piece. I don't know if you've done any report on this, Paddy, but I think this has come from a piece from Football Insider earlier this week, where it says Dan Purdy's in talks to join PSV Eindhoven. Obviously, Marcel Brands is there at the moment. But that would feel like quite a significant change before the Friedkins come in. He's obviously been here for a while. He's obviously been in a couple of different roles, but someone who's pretty well established in the recruitment setup now.
Yeah. Do you remember that account on Twitter? I think it was like Slow Sports News, where they like tweet stuff out from like a few years ago, and it would just completely confuse the hell out of people before they cottoned on to that. Reminds me a little bit of that, because obviously Marcel Brands left Everton a while ago, and Dan Purdy was part of that structure, and there was clearly some talk at the time that he might go and join Marcel over in Eindhoven in Holland. And I think that's at various points that's obviously been mooted, but I've not heard anything along those lines right now. And I think quite a lot of people at the club are just waiting to see what happens and see what comes with this new regime. There may well be changed in some areas. There may well not be change in other areas. And I think everyone's just waiting to see what's happening. So in answer to the question, no, I don't think right now it signifies anything. and I don't even think it would do even if it was definitely true. Purely because of those things that we've mentioned there. Like it's an ongoing situation. People are waiting to see what's going on with their jobs and everything else. I don't think anything decisive has happened on those fronts yet, with the kind of the big key pillars like Dyche and Thelwell. And I think Thelwell's future is probably more important for the heads of departments than Dyche's, because they're somebody like Dan Purdy would work much closer with Thelwell than he would do with the manager at times. So no, I don't think so, and I also don't think it would be in this case, given the relationship with Marcel Brands. I don't think it'd be a case of the Friedkins going, "You're free to leave." It'd be somebody else pursuing an opportunity while there's uncertainty at the club. So no, I don't think it tells us anything about the structure, and I don't think the Friedkins necessarily have answers to all those questions right now.
Yeah, and we've had this one as well from Bramley Toffee Apple about the academy. You said we've had some excellent progress in the last 6 months with some of our young players, Benjamin, Graham, Dixon, Armstrong, etc. Where do you think the progression leaves the group in the age groups above? Does our loaning system need looking at, and does it need work?
Good question, because I think the under-18s are coming along quite nicely, at least with regards to certain positions and certain talent in those positions. What it does mean, and I think the question alludes to this well, is that you want to promote somebody like Braden Graham quite early in his development. Benjamin's already in the 21 setup, so it's slightly different. But there needs to be a pathway there. There can't be somebody in the 21s blocking that route. It's going to be an interesting one, and it's going to be up to the club that they would need to send the right players out on loan at the right times to keep that going. But I think there will be a commitment to doing so. I mean, Braden Graham signed his first pro deal very recently, which is obviously a huge step for him and the club. Ties his future to Everton for the foreseeable. But I think that was all already part of the agreement over the summer, if that makes sense. They got him over here with the promise of a pro when he became a 17-year-old, when you can sign it. So I think they'll be pretty committed to his development, and I think they will continue to use the loan market. I mean, there's a number of lads out on loan right now. Some injured. Onyango's got a bad injury, I think. Jensen Metcalf's picked up an injury. And then others who are kind of recovering from injury, like Stan Mills, who was out on loan last season. So I think these lads will get opportunities. It's just a case of when.
Yeah, it's probably been a while since. I'm trying to think of a player who went out on loan, came back, and really established themselves in the academy. Like it's been a long time since that's happened, hasn't it? Like there's not been many. Like I always remember when Kieran Darwin went to Forest, and I thought this is going to be the making of him. And it just Barkley's probably the last one, really. Yeah, but even that, his loan spells weren't great, were they? Like he had a bit of a shocker at Leeds, didn't he? I think Warnock sent him back, or he was dropped certainly. And I remember Dow going to Forest and was tearing it up, and then I think they changed manager, didn't they, midway through the season? Yeah. When they got Karanka in, he was just very defensive, and it just ruined any development for him. So I suppose that's the risk, isn't it, when you send them out on loan? Like you can send them somewhere to a style and a coach you think is going to suit them, and they can get sacked, and it ultimately all comes tumbling down.
You know the one you've forgotten?
Go on.
Jared Branthwaite.
Jared Branthwaite, of course, yeah. But I don't really see him as
he's not an academy graduate.
Because he went to PSV as well. It was it's almost like a step up from us, isn't it? Really, in a way, they're playing European football. It's mad to say, but that is an obvious one. I should have known.
That's the blueprint. Yeah. That's how you want every loan to go. And I loved that loan because it was different league, different style of play, exposure to European football at an early age. So that kind of has to be the blueprint. I think it's a good point. Going further back, remember Leon Osmond coming back and establishing himself as a loan to Derby.
Coleman when he went to Blackpool.
Seamus Coleman as well. Slightly more recently, obviously. So it can happen, but it's kind of few and far between. I mean, Everton do like to send the players out on loan, but we're yet to see too many be integrated into the first team. And again, that might be something to do with who's in charge at that level.
I think it's rare, isn't it, for a player who gets above the age of 20, who's not played for the senior teams, and then come back and break in. You want them. Look at Gordon, for example. He was in the first team when he was 17. because like the talent was there, and he was just sort of like, he wasn't immediately ready, but you could see that he had something. And I think,
but this manager believes in it though. This
Yeah.
manager believes, like if you've heard him speak about Harrison Armstrong or Roman Dixon, for example, he actually believes the next step for both of those, realistically, is a loan. That Everton are in a strong enough place with the first team setup that those two can go off and play 20, 30 games somewhere over the course of a season. And I think that probably is still the right way to go here, because what's under 21s football going to do for Harrison Armstrong? Now he's had a bit of Premier League exposure, a bit of other cup exposure in cup games, and he's playing regularly for England under 18s now. It's not going to do much for him. So they need to keep playing, they need to keep developing, and sometimes it works out, sometimes it doesn't. It is an imperfect system, but I think it's the best system you've got in terms of making that bridge between the Premier League 2 and the actual Premier League a little bit easier.
Yeah, we'll finish off with this double header quick fire one from the mailbag queen Maggie, who's decided to come and slum it with the byline this week, because a couple of questions. We'll do quick fire answers on these, Paddy, from both of us. Which player do you think looks most out of place in the team? I'm going to say Ndiaye, because his skill and ability seems very much at odds with the way in which we want to play. And I think sometimes when he gets the ball in tight space and tries and goes on little dribbles, it's like, who do a pass to here? And it just stands out a mile. So I'll say him for me.
Yeah, I mean, there's a few, isn't there? Like, Orel Mangala is clearly a possession player. So I think he would do better in a more possession-focused system. You probably lose a little bit of something of Jared Branthwaite's ball carrying and passing ability with him there. But I do agree with you. I think the obvious one is Ndiaye. And I think I make this point on every show. Still love to see him as a number 10. Like, actually being able to turn in that space and drive immediately at the back four. I think it'd be so useful for Everton.
Definitely. And the second part of that question is, who's the one who hasn't had his chance yet but would really fit the mould? I'll let you go first on this one in the interest of fair play and sportsmanship.
But the one who hasn't had his chance yet but would really fit the mould. So a player that's not getting games that should get games. Until last week, I'd have been flippant and said Jared Branthwaite.
Well, it's not necessarily who'd do well, but who would really fit the style. I think there's an obvious one here, and it would just tie the whole podcast together lovely in a nice little circle if you said this player.
You go ahead and say, because
it's got to be Jake O'Brien, hasn't it? Big, massive centre half, heads and kicks everything away. He should be ideal for the way in which Dyche wants to play.
I believe he sees himself as a ball player, though.
I mean, we haven't seen loads of him, but from what we have seen of him, I have to be honest, I didn't get that vibe at all. Like, I might be completely wrong, but
I thought he was comfortable on the ball. I thought he looked quite good playing the ball into midfield. And I know that was his reputation in France as well. But he's tall. You could imagine him as set pieces and so on and so forth. So, yeah, Jake O'Brien's probably the best option, because I don't look at many of the others. They're kind of on the fringes, really, and say that they're an obvious fit for what Sean Dyche wants. I mean, Jack Harrison for Jesper Lindstrom. Harrison kind of does what Dyche wants, maybe more so than Lindstrom. But Lindstrom's obviously got pace and a lot of talent. There's not many. I think the first part of the question is much easier to answer. The ones that kind of look a bit out of place in the setup.
It's probably quite worrying that we haven't got many answers to this second part, but we'll save that for another time potentially. Yeah. But we'll wrap it up there. Managed to get through all the questions there, I believe. So cheers to everybody for sending them in. We'll be back next week with actual football to talk about. It is massive game at Goodison on Saturday against Brentford. Bit nervous already thinking about it, but just cheers to Paddy. Just a reminder, this podcast is sponsored by the Bridewell. Do get yourselves down there if you're out in town around for the match this weekend. And if you watch us on YouTube, do leave us a comment, do hit subscribe, do hit like. It all helps. If you're listening to us,
rating out of 5.
Rate 5 out of 5 in the comments. We did get 1 last week, didn't we? Which is good to know. My admin guff, which I have to say on every podcast. And if you're listening to us on Spotify or on iTunes or any other podcast platform, do leave us a rating. Do leave us a review. That has been the Everton Byline. Up the toffees, and we'll catch you again very soon.